For more on what's been happening in Venezuela, we can bring in Brian Naranjo, a former senior U.S. diplomat and former deputy chief of mission in Caracas. Brian, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, Brian, I want to begin by asking, as someone who has experience dealing with the Maduro government, how do you feel now that he's gone, and do you think this will be better for Venezuela?
I have to say, I'm very concerned about the direction following yesterday's events. I think that while we can all recognize that the operation to grab Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores was a surgical operation, although we don't know about any casualties that may have happened on the margins. I think that we still are looking at a regime in Venezuela that is largely still intact. Two of the power ministers, for example, the defense minister and the minister of interior, are still in place, and they have been taking actions to mobilize people. You also have Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president. I knew her when she was the foreign minister, stepping into the role as vice president. She's being very careful not to say that she's assumed the presidency, but the regime is still functioning. And I think that every day that goes by that the opposition is not able to demonstrate a strong show of force on the street is a day that the regime restores its strength.
I want to follow up on that because from the press conference yesterday, Donald Trump basically said that Marco Rubio had had conversations with Rodriguez and she was willing to do what Washington wanted to make, quote, Venezuela great again. So, and then today she's come out and said, look, you've got to return Maduro. So it seems like there's a disconnect here. Maybe there's something more going on behind the scenes. But, what do you think the U.S. is going to do? Are they going to bring boots on the ground? I mean, what possible scenarios do you see here based on that?
So you have all the easy questions for me this morning, or this afternoon, your time. I have to say I'm really at a loss to say what is going on. It is hard to me to envision that Delcy Rodriguez, who is a sophisticated lady, educated in France, where she studied labor law. She's definitely a woman of the left. She's well traveled. I have spoken with her personally in the past. She is very cagey. She's soft spoken. This is not somebody who is going to be easily tricked into going along with something. She's also a hardcore ideologue. So it's very hard for me to envision anything other than what she's doing right now, which is calling for Maduro's return, which is calling for Venezuela to stand strong against the United States. I'm very skeptical that that the conversations that Secretary of State Marco Rubio may have had with Delcy Rodriguez would have gone down that path. And I think the best evidence of that is her hosting a cabinet meeting yesterday, her demanding to see proof of life about Maduro, her demanding the president's immediate return. I don't see that that's a partner for a reconstruction or return to democracy in Venezuela. Indeed, I'm left with my biggest question, which I've had now for a couple of months, which is what is the plan? Where are the resources? Where's the manpower? There are not enough Marines and soldiers offshore of Venezuela that are capable of coming in and maintaining order, establishing a strong presence of stability. There's no USAID that exists anymore to provide the kind of economic assistance that we require to rebuild things. There's no U.S. embassy in the country anymore to serve as a nucleus for trying to build out that team you want to talk about. So I have many, many questions about the way forward here. Meanwhile, events in Venezuela and Caracas are moving forward very quickly still.
Now, as we've also been discussing, Donald Trump has appeared to rule out working with the opposition. You heard in that report there. So, we're talking about Edmundo Gonzalez, Maria Corina Machado. They've both spoken out on social media saying this is an opportunity. So what are the possible next steps for the opposition? Can they mobilize? Is there a way to have a dialogue with the regime in Venezuela at this point?
Uh, that was probably the most disheartening thing to hear yesterday was the way that President Trump and the administration were so dismissive of Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez. I've known Edmundo Gonzalez for years. He's a very skilled diplomat. I've met numerous times with Maria Corina Machado. They are the core and the leadership of the opposition there. It is very clear that Edmundo Gonzalez won by a very comfortable margin the last elections. So if we're talking about restoration of democracy, we need to go back to that point where they went off the rails, which would have been in 2024. Now, the opposition does have extensive contacts throughout Washington and the United States. I have to believe that they're burning up the phone lines, trying to, carve out space for them in the way forward here. But in terms of any sort of dialogue with the regime in Caracas, I see no reason why somebody like Delcy Rodriguez or anybody on her team would want to, at this point, engage in conversations with the opposition. It's not in their interest. They're all about trying to restore regime stability right now, and entering into conversations with the opposition from their perspective would not make a lot of sense.
Now, Brian, we also heard, to go back to this press conference yet again, Washington justified its actions, accusing Maduro of narco terrorism, and that this was all, a massive national security issue. But are there other motives behind getting rid of Maduro for the U.S.?
Look, this has been really a hard thread to follow throughout this entire story. I mean, when we began looking at the start of this latest contretemps with Venezuela, it was all about counter narcotics, okay, not regime change. But we've shifted into regime change here over the ensuing weeks and months. I think that there's a deep desire to remove him from power. One is left scratching their head, though, wondering about how are we going to square this with the democratic elections that already took place in Venezuela? How are you going to build that transition that can get you back towards a democracy, towards prosperity? Okay. One of my fears here is that this is starting to look like a possible deal to be cut, that peace is going to be achieved through business. Okay. And I think that one thing that would be terribly concerning about that kind of result would be that the Venezuelan people lose in that kind of scenario, and the opposition would be disgraced. This would actually be putting the current regime in power, and that is a regime that is not legitimate right now. Okay, Delcy Rodriguez is no more legitimate in her position in terms of having electoral support than Nicolas Maduro. So I have to say, after the news conference yesterday, I'm left with far more questions and far less clarity than before that press conference took place.
Brian, yes, Donald Trump, he mentioned oil numerous times in yesterday's press conference. Do you think the country's vast oil reserves have played into what's been unfolding?
Yes, that has to be on their mind, quite frankly. It's well known Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, and whatnot. Venezuela used to be one of the most significant providers of oil to the United States. If we turn the clock back, or the calendar back 30 years, Venezuela was producing 11% of the world's oil. Today, they produce less than 0.5%. That oil industry is in an utter state of collapse these days. It is going to require hundreds of billions of dollars to bring it up online. But the other thing I need to ask is this oil as strategic of a asset as it was once believed to be? Today, the largest producer of oil in the world is the United States. It's not Venezuela. It's not other countries in the world. We're seeing a shift into other types of energy generation. But I think oil is very much on Donald Trump's mind. He is very much a man of the 80s, when Venezuela was living its halcyon days of oil boom and whatnot. So I do believe that is part of his calculus.
Now, Brian, what sort of impact do you think this will have regionally? Marco Rubio had said yesterday at the press conference that if he was in the Cuban government, he'd be worrying. The leaders of both Brazil and Colombia have denounced this. So, what sort of impact do you think this will have?
Yeah, so this is having this is a real watershed for the region. We're seeing a sharp split between countries in the region. Whereas you might have conservative-led countries like Argentina, Ecuador voicing full-throated support for the intervention, we're seeing major players that are more of the left, whether that's Brazil, Colombia, or Mexico, taking a softer approach or outright condemning the intervention. Mexico and Venezuela have been very hard on the U.S. actions there. Petro in Colombia has temporized a bit. Have to remember there are millions of Colombians in Venezuela. They share a very long and complex border, so he's calling for negotiation and whatnot. I think the most interesting thing that came out of the press conference yesterday were Marco Rubio's comments in which he focused significantly on Cuba. And this brings to mind one concern that I've had for a number of years, and that is that the Cuban American population in the United States doesn't care so much about Venezuela and Venezuelan democracy as much as it cares about trying to deal a real death blow to the Cuban regime on the island. And what they want to do with Venezuela is cut oil to the island. Okay. It begs the question as to how committed the United States really is to Venezuela. I mean, when I woke up yesterday and saw that the United States had intervened in Venezuela, I knew that the United States had just taken much greater ownership of the problem that is Venezuela than it had 24 hours earlier. How are we going to follow through on the responsibilities that come with that? I found the remarks on Cuba to be very disturbing.
Now, Brian, I want to go back to your time working in Venezuela. Obviously, you had the pulse of what the people were thinking. So, thinking back now, because it's really about what's going to happen for the people in Venezuela. What do you think they're feeling about all of this? I mean, I'm sure a lot of them are not sad to see Maduro go, but what comes next?
Yeah, so I just retired from the U.S. Foreign Service after about 32 years. I did about a third of that service working on Venezuela. I have worked on Venezuela across 3 different decades. I was there in the 90s. I ran the desk in Washington in 2001 to 2003, and I returned to the country for 4 years as a deputy for mission from 2014 to 18. My wife is Venezuelan. My daughter is Venezuelan. Even my cat is Venezuelan. I live in a small corner of Venezuela here. And our phone lines were burning up yesterday, going back and forth to Venezuela, talking to friends, family, and whatnot. I think, yes, there is an awful lot of euphoria that Maduro has been removed. That's undeniable. I think that there's, however, a great deal of skepticism as to what happens now. The contacts that I've been speaking with are being very cautious about being very public with their support for the removal of Maduro because they don't know what's going to happen. Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello, for example, has mobilized the colectivos and other paramilitary and irregular groups to go back on the streets of Caracas. They're very experienced at doing that. They have done that at numerous demonstrations going back over the past 20 years and whatnot. The Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, has also activated plans for this kind of eventuality from the military. I think absent a sign that the control on the ground is really shifting, I think any public celebrations are going to be episodic and sporadic, and they're not going to endure all that long. Okay, I'm not going to say that they're not happening. We do see them from different television clips and on social media, but people are very tense right now. I've heard that certain quarters of Caracas, for example, are very, very quiet, a type of quiet that they've not seen since pandemic. There's a lot of nervousness. People are trying to get gasoline, food, things like that to be prepared to ride out a storm. It's almost like they're getting ready for a big blizzard or a hurricane.
Brian, thank you so much for speaking with us today, sharing your analysis. That's Brian Naranjo, a retired senior U.S. Foreign Service officer and Deputy Chief of Mission in Caracas.